And welcome to another update. In this one, I'll be covering the whole front line, starting out in the northern parts, where the Russian forces are continuing their attacks on the whole front line from Makiyivka to Verkhnukamianske, where they are continuing their attacks on Ukrainian positions in these areas, mainly artillery strikes, but also physical fighting between two units. Then we move on to the Bakhmut front, where the Russian forces continue their attacks north of Selzhnyansk in the direction of the E40 highway. And there was some artillery geolocated footage of Ukrainian forces artillery striking Russian positions here by the forest lines to the north of Vodihovo-Vasilivka. Then we also see fighting to the south of Vodihovo-Vasilivka and fighting within Bohdanivka itself. And according to Remilin 23, a major attack on Bohdanivka underway. PMC Wagner wants to take control of the village as quickly as possible, but there's also a lot of Ukrainian manpower in and around the village. So essentially, the fighting by Bohdanivka has significantly increased after the Russian forces reached the village yesterday. The Russian forces have continuously attacked the village and are storming it as they are fighting within the city itself. Then we also see fighting in the direction of Romove, but not the same as Bohdanivka. This is more positional. And fighting by the Rose Alley area is also very intense according to Remy. And fighting here by the rail lines to the east of the rail line. Fighting is undergoing on the whole front by the rail line as the Russian forces are trying to capture everything east of it, splitting the city into half by the rail lines. The main points of battle within the eastern parts is around both stadiums, both here to the south and here to the north, where the main fighting is happening here by this stadium right here, by the Stadion Avanrad. And it seems that the Russian forces are connecting to this place from three different directions, from the west, from the south, and from the east, as they continue trying to advance in this area. So heavy fighting is taking place here in the southern area. As for the central area, this is a bit lighter fighting, as there's not a lot of units in this area. More fighting is focused around the northern stadium or the central stadium via Hotel Bakhmut, and the Russian forces are here trying to gain control over the center of this area. At the same time, as I mentioned in my earlier report, the Russian forces have reached this marketplace here to the west of the central area, and they have also reached the church here as well as the civil area here by the north of the marketplace. So fighting is taking place here as the Russian forces captured this area here during the night, according to the latest update by Deep State Map. And we also see fighting here in the northern area by the police station here in Bakhmut. So essentially there's heavy fighting here in the central part of Bakhmut as the Russian forces are storming the whole area, trying to gain control over everything to the east of the rail lines. We also see fighting here in the southwestern areas, but this is more of a tactical battle as the Russian forces are here facing Ukrainian special forces as well as mechanized units. So essentially the Ukrainian forces are more fortified and better equipped and better trained in the southwestern area than they are in the central area. Also, the explanation for this rapid advance within the center of Bakhmut is that the Russian forces have actually combined together with the Wagnerian forces and they're now fighting side by side. So the amount of and type of Russian troops within Bakhmut is unclear, but it seems that according to multiple sources, the Russian soldiers within the city are of the VDV kind, which is the Russian airborne troops, as well as special forces, and in other sources it is also marine soldiers. So essentially a variety of Russian forces, but what they all have in common is that they are the best trained and best equipped of the Russian forces that they have sent to this part of the front line, not the mobilized forces, but the active forces in the Russian army. So it is a combination of Wagner professional troops and Russian special forces, as well as well-trained and well-equipped troops fighting within Bakhmut, and they are there in large numbers, because Wagner itself already matched Ukrainian forces numbers according to history legends.
But they don't show their own forces. What's interesting is that General Milley estimated that the Wagner PMC has about 6,000 elite fighters in Bakhmut. supported by 20 to 30,000 new recruits, many of whom come from prisons. Let's assume that half of all of Wagner's forces are directly involved in the urban battle of Bakhmut, roughly 15,000 soldiers. That would mean a ratio of 1v1 between the attacker and the defender.
So with the addition of these reservists who just came in from the Wagner forces, according to Remy, and also with the addition of Russian special forces, professional soldiers added into this mix, the Russian forces now have a significant numerical advantage within the city, which allows for this rapid advance. And I say rapid advance because the Russian forces have managed to capture this whole area that is marked out within the first 4 days of April. Comparing that to the rest of the city being taken over the period of 8 months, this is a very rapid advance. Then we move on to the southwest of Bakhmut in the direction of Ivanivske, where here fighting continues. Now, something very important I want to talk about in regards to the Battle of Bakhmut is that we have entered a very strategic and critical part of this battle. And I say that because the current situation is that the Russian forces have managed to significantly increase their attacks as well as their progress within the city. And that happened as soon as the snow fell within the city, and now we see a couple of days with a lot of rain, which means that the ground and the roads around Bakhmut will be muddy. So essentially the Russian forces took advantage of the weather to start a offensive, and they believe that this offensive will be enough for them to capture the city. So the current operation by the Russian forces is to fully capture the city. So why is this critical and strategically important? That is because Zelensky has spent many months claiming that Bakhmut will never fall and that the Ukrainian forces will be able to push them back and actually retake the city. They have been saying that the fall of Bakhmut would be terrible and horrible for the Ukrainian army, both strategically and politically, and that everyone will start blaming him if the city falls. So there's a lot politically at stake. And essentially what we're seeing is that the Ukrainian forces are now in a situation where they cannot launch a counterattack because of the weather conditions. They would have to drive through the mud, which would be devastating for the Ukrainian forces and would essentially reduce any attempts at a counteroffensive to be minimal at best, unless they are able to gain control over the roads. But as we can see, the Russian forces have control over the northern road, and the central road could be used, but it is constantly under fire. Any other areas like the southern parts in the direction of Gurdyumivka, Usaryanivka, these villages to the south, they are essentially free from harm as there's a lot of open fields and not a lot of roads next to them. And at the same time, in the northern area, the situation is the same. There's a lot of open fields. There's not a lot of areas to drive through in this weather. So essentially, they would have to go with a full frontal assault to break the current advance of the Russian forces. And that would be very costly. And the other option is just to wait until the weather gets better, and that could take long enough for the Russian forces to actually capture Bakhmut. So the time is on Ukrainian side. The longer they wait, the better an opportunity they have at a counterattack. However, the Russian forces seem to make the most out of that time and try to capture the city before the weather gets better, which will prevent a Ukrainian counterattack, as the Ukrainian forces would have to make the choice. Either they lose Bakhmut or they counterattack through the mud. So we will have to see what happens. Will the Ukrainians counterattack through the mud, or will the Russians take the city, or will the Russians be too slow and the Ukrainians will launch a counterattack once the ground becomes dry again? And that is all for the Bakhmut front. Then we move on to the Avdiivka front, where here the Russian forces are attacking the direction of Keramik, as well as in the direction of Kamyanka, where the situation still hasn't cleared up, so I'm still taking it as Ukrainian possession. Fighting also continues north of Opytne in the direction of Avdiivka, as well as in the direction of Severne from Vodiane, as well as fighting continuing within the city of Prvomaiske, both to the northern area, the central area, and in the southern area in the direction of Nevelske. Fighting also continues in the direction of Marinka, both to the center and to the north. And according to Wargon, so the Ukrainian forces have actually managed to conduct a counterattack in Pobieda, where they have managed to recapture parts of the Russian advances over the past few months. And then we see fighting here by Novomikhailivka as well as Uledar as the Russian forces continue their positional attacks in these directions. So that is all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.